Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Crypto Live Leak. Today is January 22nd of 2019, and today we will be covering day one of the World Economic Forum. So, World Economic Forum began today in Davos, Switzerland. It's the meeting of all the global world leaders and corporate CEOs to discuss global financial outreach goals concerning 2019 and well into the future. So our focus today is going to be on the strategic outlook on the digital economy. It was an open forum that was done in Davos today with CEOs of companies such as Huawei and Nokia, where they discussed what was going to be the largest markets in 2019 concerning the digital economy, as well as how they intend to meet the Globalization 4.0 goals and what some of the challenges are going to be going forward, both in 2019 and into the 2020s. So today we'll be reviewing the strategic outlook on the digital economy, a review between CEOs of multinational corporations at Davos, Switzerland on day one, and what they feel is going to be the largest markets in 2019 and heading into the 2020s, and how these different CEO members and companies and governments plan to meet Globalization 4.0 goals. So before we get into the actual roundtable and questions, let's try to discuss what Globalization 4.0 goals are. So according to the World Economic Forum's website, they actually publish what they believe the 4.0 goals are and some of the challenges related to them will be. And one of the biggest things that we've seen is the concept of globalism versus globalist, and how populism in kind of largely recent government elections all over the world has really been kind of an outlash against globalization models in kind of the two terms of a concept of globalization as far as integration of different world economies versus globalist in there being kind of a neoliberal global agenda to control world economies, and that difference in the outlash back. So according to the website, how one paragraph I'm going to read as far as the challenges that we address moving forward into the 2020s is concerning global government's architecture. So with more and more kind of populist elections focusing on the concept of taking power back and taking control back, and with nationalism, the challenge is to restore sovereignty in a world that requires cooperation. I'm reading directly from this article. Rather than closing off economies through protectionism and nationalist policies, we must forge a new social compact between citizens and their leaders so that everyone feels secure enough at home to remain open to the world at large. Failing that, the ongoing disintegration of our social fabric could ultimately lead to the failure of democracy. So how do we begin to address kind of the changing roles of technology in the space, the digitalization of our economy, the integration of our economy, and then also different protectionist policies that are currently happening and being employed by different governments throughout the world? Most notably right now, the continuing trade war between China and the United States. So getting into the roundtable and the outlook on the digital economy. So in speaking, Ken Hu, who's a major CEO at Huawei, talked about how he believed that 5G would be the biggest market in 2019. And apparently companies are will begin to launch 5G networks in 2019. And he believes that that will bring more people to achieve access to digital banking. So I believe, and he also directly referenced blockchain markets and artificial technology. So could this potentially be a positive benefit to the blockchain space and to cryptocurrency markets in general, as more people gain access to cell phones and the internet, and more control over their own money, who never really had it before? There's a lot of emerging economies that don't necessarily have the infrastructure of banking or trust in bureaucratic agencies or companies that can facilitate that. So this concept of peer-to-peer and individual can give them control over it and bring them into an economy that they hadn't been a participant in previously. And I think that access to digital banking services could be a very positive rule for decentralized blockchain networks and cryptocurrency moving forward in 2019 and into 2020. Another very good point that the CEO of Visa brought up is the continued growth of e-commerce markets. So currently, e-commerce markets are growing at 4 times the rate of that in brick and mortar stores. So that's not anything of a revolutionary statement. If you look at companies like Amazon, eBay, if you look at the amount of digital services that are offered and subscription services from Spotify, Pandora, to Uber, to Netflix, you see that a lot of new services are being offered exclusively online and transplanting services that had previously didn't exist in that space. So new markets and new companies will continue to emerge that are trying to gain access and appeal to new consumers like never before, and kind of outpace traditional retail space. Another big point that was made by the CEO of Nokia, Rajiv Suri, that you can see below, is a statement he made concerning that computing and data will be decentralized as localized networks must be within 100 kilometers. So he's talking exclusively about the launch of new 5G networks in 2019 and this concept of localization versus globalization, and how one of the goals of globalization 4.0 is to try to help localize new emerging economies, and that how he believes it will be inherently local because the majority of these networks, in order to function, have people to have access to them, still have to have transmission towers and different networks built within a certain radius of where they live. And so I thought that that was a very interesting point. So it was certainly not all a positive outlook. There are a lot of concerns, and it gets into a lot of theories a little later into the introductions as questions start to go around. And I thought one of the more interesting points came from one of the Stanford professors on the panels when she talks explicitly about techlash and this concept of a trust deficit. So she mentioned and outlined 2 points. So one of the largest things why we've seen outlash against globalization policies, and really largely the concept of globalization itself, is related to economic inclusion, and how a lot of the benefit has only at this point benefited such a certain small percent of the population, primarily the wealthy. And people lack confidence that they're going to experience the growth within this space moving forward. The second point she brought up is labor displacement, which is a very real concern as artificial intelligence and robotics and other technologies change the nature of how work will be moving forward. Will technology outpace the number of jobs that will be available to an educated workforce? And that's a very real concern as well. And more importantly than the concept of whether or not AI and robotics can outpace traditional jobs is, do people perceive and believe that the jobs that they're training for will become obsolete? And so how does the nature of work change? How does the satisfaction and value that you put in your own work change moving forward if you believe that you're replaceable? So what is your confidence within that system? And then how are you going to benefit? It's only going to benefit different technological companies and tech companies within that space that are building that technology. Do you feel like you're being left behind? So with concern to the trust deficit, the speaker who was instructing our panel threw out a very interesting fact. She talked about the Edelman test barometer and how companies scored the highest on trust among consumers and people polled, more so than any other topic, including governments and civil society. And employees also joining companies for purpose and staying for culture. So this concept that the CEO of a company and his views and values are more important and extend outside of just maybe what the company is doing itself. So this concept of social responsibility that can extend, and how companies project themselves to have a kind of certain label or certain stance to appeal to larger consumer markets, which I think is a huge trend, since companies and corporations typically are risk averse. They don't delve into politics. They don't want to upset any or alienate any certain segment of their consumer base that could be construed as having bias, where, well, I don't, if I'm, I may immediately think of like a Chick-fil-A, for example, a couple of years ago when their owners, who were very religious, came out against gay marriage. I think more recently of Nike with their Colin Kaepernick campaign for social justice. This idea of like appealing to consumers' different biases, even though the same root is capitalism, which is profit. So I thought that was a very interesting take. As far as outlook concerning 2019 and how it relates to cryptocurrency, expanding 5G networks, and the new phones that will accompany them, certainly, particularly to the global south and new emerging markets, will bring in more people that never had access to it before. So you are attracting to new consumers, and you're trying to help lift the impoverished and bring them into the middle class, which ultimately is the World Economic Forum's goal. Because as you lift people out of poverty, now they actually have money for consumer spending, and they feel more free to spend it. Another aspect concerning blockchain, as we touched upon, is related to AI and the nature of work and how that's going to change moving forward. So with respect to personal banking, obviously one of the big things is trying to get and minimize the intermediary and any kind of medium. And they also talked about that as well, as far as like how companies are going to appeal to consumers directly when there's more market competition. Does that alleviate or does that restrict the middleman, so that way they can appeal directly to the lower price to benefit the consumer? Or does competition within the market because of the access and the localization of different economies, would people prefer to purchase things that are closer? There's a lot to kind of get into with concerning consumer goods and how we continue to move forward with how goods and services are offered to people, and how their spending habits will continue to move towards digital as opposed to traditional retail markets. Again, in a lot of this conversation, the video, you can find it on the World Economic Forum's website, Strategic Outlook on the Digital Economy. It did it did get rather theoretical in its discussions concerning the techlash and the concept of the trust deficit moving forward. And as I outlined before we even got into the video, concerning Globalization 4.0. They talk about it extensively as far as concerns regarding populism, nationalist setback, and kind of how the threats to democracy, how if if these goals don't necessarily perpetuate those, the challenge becomes how to reconcile them. So the way that this challenge will be met largely is through economic inclusion. As long as people still feel that they are being marginalized and not benefiting from the system itself, then you'll continue to see this backlash against tech and the continuance of these things in general. And there are many concerns. There's many concerns concerning privacy and liberty, and how everything moving to the Internet of One to a large extent threatens us both on an individual level, on a national level, on an international level, um, on a consumer-based level. Does it make things more expensive? And as technology moves forwards and the nature of work change, does the displacement of labor within the workforce, does technology outpace the amount of jobs that may be available to people that are actually being lifted and being brought up as technology expands in the global south and new emerging markets? So a lot to get into. One positive sign is that as new 5G networks launch and you bring more people into the fold than never before, particularly a lot who have never had access to traditional banking markets, and you see the digitalization of everything, I do believe that moving forward, it's a positive outlook for cryptocurrency and blockchain technology. So thank you very much for your time. Follow us on cll.org. Start earning and attention mining your CLL today. And thank you.